Hey, and a very warm welcome to the Into the LightWeb podcast with me, your hostess, Joanna Hunter, metaphysical teacher, spiritual life and business coach, published author, and the high priestess of the LightWeb, a spiritual technology that will change your life. This is the place to be to talk everything under the LightWeb, from consciousness, relationships, to money, to spiritual business, and everything in between. So if you are watching this on Facebook, YouTube, or anywhere else where we've posted this, and if you're watching this live, give us a little green heart emoji if you're catching us live. If you're watching on the replay, give us a little pink heart emoji so that we know that you're catching it. So welcome to another transmission of light. So with these, we are doing these every Monday. And it's really just what's come through my channel and what is coming through today. So today I've got a really juicy conversation for you guys. The conversation I want to have today is about something that we call project, or Skylar teaches on, called Project Fear. And it's an energy that I became very aware of, and it's something that we will see. And once I describe what Project Fear is, you'll start to see Project Fear kind of a little bit all over the place, all over our society, all over the place and things. But it is a really, important topic and conversation. And I want to speak today not only on Project Fear, but I want to speak today on how Project Fear, as maybe a spiritual leader or spiritual business owner, might actually show up for you, and how fear might actually show up for you in your life and business as well, because this is something that shows up for a lot of people. So what I want to start with is, what is Project Fear? So what Project Fear is a part of the ascension process. So when we move through and we begin to ascend in consciousness, so as we begin, our consciousness begins to rise and get higher and higher and higher, there is this period of awakening. And as we're going through that period of awakening, and really choosing to kind of have an awakened life, or choosing to wake up in this lifetime and not be so subject to our conditioning, not be so subject to all the things that are going on in life, but really choosing to emit our own frequency and choosing to be sovereign in our own being. So when we are in that kind of state of energy and we're starting to choose that energy, what happens is that fear in our lives actually cranks up and not down, which is why anybody who's been through spiritual awakening will tell you that it feels like a 24/7 shit show of epic proportions. And quite often awakening, we have this beautiful idea. The word awakening sounds very gentle and it sounds very pretty in a way, that we flutter our eyelids, we're like some Hollywood starlet rubbing the sleep from our eyes with a full face of makeup, and somehow that was awakening. But for most people experience awakening as a questioning of freaking everything, and you go through this thing of not even knowing which way is up, which way is down, what the feck is going on, and things that you thought were one way, you realize they're actually the other way, and all the things. So the process of awakening often starts with Project Fear. And what happens with Project Fear is, where Skylar has taught me that fear is who we are not. It's basically the essence of who we are not. So we have who we are, which is source, which is the universe. And then we have the contrast to that in this physical world, which is who we are not. And we call that, in my world, void energy. So when we're in void energy is really like the the void energy is really like the kind of opposite of everything that we are. So, you know, if we are the light, then the void is the dark. If we are expanding our consciousness, the void is contracting it. So when we're inhabiting that void energy, void is fear and source. The truth of who we are is love. So when we're in that really, really deep, deep, deep fearful state of energy, project fear starts to crank up. And what happens is it's like the volume of the fear in our lives gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And it gets to a point where we can't actually stand the fear any longer. And that's what I call the fuck it point. The fuck it point is where we're like, fuck it. We've had enough. The fear is at max. We've had enough. We're like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not subscribing to this anymore. I've had enough of this. At that point, that's the point where everything begins to change. That's the point where we're like, we're not going to subscribe to the fear anymore. So for some of us, what that experience is maybe we are in a work that we don't enjoy, or we're in a job that we don't like. And maybe, you know, you're experiencing things like bullying or something like that in the workforce. And the fear of that, the fear of losing your job is the reason you don't leave the job that you hate. But yet you keep going to the job, and you're like, eventually you get to a point where you're like, you know what, who needs a job anyway, you know, even though we know logically in society it's good to have a job so that we can pay our bills and we can pay our way forward. But we get to a point where we're willing to completely and utterly surrender. And that is the purpose of Project Fear. The purpose of Project Fear is to drive us to the absolute edge of our sanity so that we can lose it. Because it's actually our sanity that's keeping us stuck in our current paradigm. It's the moment where we become willing to challenge the status quo. It's the moment where we become willing to say enough is enough. Now, I became very aware of Project Fear around about the time that Donald Trump got elected. And I was like, what world do we live in? And that was my own humanness, and that was my own human experience. And I was thinking, oh my God, wasn't much better over on this side of the pond because we had Boris Johnson. And I was thinking, oh my God, you know, what is going on? And I thought I need to have a conversation with my spirit team, Skylar, about this, because I was like, what the actual F? And what Skylar came back to me with was that both of these men were agents of the universe. They were all both agents. And that if you thought that you had reached a certain level of spiritual enlightenment, which a lot of people at that point in time in the collective had, and of course, as we move into ascended consciousness and we begin to appreciate a bigger picture, which is what ascended consciousness does, it allows us to have a bigger picture. As we do that, what happens is that we move into oneness. We move into what we call in my world unity. But it's all very well when you are surrounded by fellow mystics and spiritual people to be one with those guys, because we're fucking awesome. Let's just face it. We're amazing. We're awesome. And it's awesome to be one with all of you guys. But not so awesome to be one with people that we may have already or continually carrying judgments around. I'm like, I'm one with you and you and you, but oh my God, I cannot be one with you. You know, it's that whole thing. But here's the thing, it's not a country club. We don't get to choose who we're one with. We're either subscribing to this idea of oneness, this idea of unity, or we're not, right? We can't, like, it's not a country club. And that means that there's like uncomfortable people in society, so people that we have deemed have done things badly in society or do wrong to society or are in it for themselves or all of that. It means that we're also being willing to say, well, I'm one with them as well. And that takes a lot of courage for a person to do that. So the awakening process, so what I began to appreciate through Project Fear was that the awakening process is not a one and done deal. We think awakening is a one and done deal, but it's actually a continuation throughout your entire life. And throughout your entire life, you are going to keep awakening. There's going to keep rubbing the sleep from your eyes. You're going to keep stepping up. You're going to keep seeing differences and changes. So the thing with, as we're moving and we're understanding Project Fear, we start to see things like another giant Project Fear that happened in society was COVID. So how many of you, let me know in the comments, just for out of interest, how many of you like we're looking at, like, you went to the supermarket, everyone was wearing these masks, right? And you went to the supermarket, and if somebody sniffled or sneezed in your direction, you were like, oh my God, you know, like you could really feel yourself get like unclean, you know, like I felt myself. I had to go and like literally have a word with myself, because I was starting to really subscribe to the fear that was in the world, right? Like I was really starting to subscribe to this fear. We had this silent killer on the loose. It was, you know, it was dangerous, bad for your health. But one of the indications that the killer was lurking was somebody sneezing. So like, of course, if they coughed and sneezed in my direction, I was like, oh, like this. And this was all Project Fear, right? Because what happened, so many of us, you know, subscribed to this, and so many of us went in down that rabbit hole of becoming very frightened, very fearful. Some of us even had that fear justified, where we lost family members to COVID. We lost people that we knew. I have several clients who said, you know, I've lost family members to COVID. Equally, I know several people who have also lost family members to taking a vaccine. So here we go, right? So it's like both sides. So again, this very real fear, the danger is real, but the fear is not. And this is one of the cool things with Project Fear, is that fear is not actually real. Fear is an illusionary state of being. What we do is we take fear and we take danger and we meld them together as though they're one thing. So we think that the things that we are frightened of are melded together with the things that are dangerous. Okay? But I want you just to think to your own lives, and I want you just to think of what's going on in your own lives. And I want you just to ask yourself this question: how many times have you been frightened of something that's truly dangerous, but the danger never came? Right? So any of you that had any financial difficulty, right? The danger of running out of the money, real, but you're still here, right? So that means you've got 100% track record of getting through life. And so the fear that you felt in that moment felt so very, very real, but actually it was illusionary, because here we are, like a few months down the line, we're here again and again. So it shows an illusion of fear, and yet the danger that you were perceiving, that your mind was saying, this is bad juju, this is like, oh my God, this could happen. And it gives you a little list of scenarios just to be helpful, so that you can really, really feel that fear crank up. The fear itself is illusionary, it's not real, but the danger can be very real. And when I started understanding the difference between danger and fear, I began to look at my life quite differently. I began to look at, think, what are the dangers in my life and what are just pure fear, which is an illusionary state of being, which means actually it would be okay if I let those go by the wayside. It would be okay if I let that go. In doing that, what's happened is that I don't live from a place of fear very often. But here's what happens when you start not living from a place of fear, and fear doesn't get to dictate your day-to-day. Fear gets sneakier. And this is what happened to me recently. And this is part of the conversation that I want to have today. So as a spiritual business owner, and as a business owner, we live in a world where, as we are moving towards unity, and we're moving towards ascension, and we're moving towards all of these things. We want to create an inclusive world. That's something that I think we could probably all agree on, that we want to create an inclusive world, and that we want to create a world that brings, that a nicer world than the one that we found, right? The one that we arrived into. We want to create a nicer world. Let me know in the comments if this is resonating and this is something that you truly desire to do as well, is to create a nicer world. So Irene here is saying yes, a nicer world. So here's a difficult conversation to have, right? Because in our desire to create this nicer world, and in our desire to do this, to be a nicer person and to be a lovely person and things like that, we work hard and we try hard to be inclusive. And yet we also have to be true to ourselves. And herein lies a little bit of a paradox and a little bit of a problem. And herein lies one of the places where Project Fear could still be in your life, where Project Fear could still be like giving you that contrast of allowing you to really see who you are, because that's the purpose of Project Fear. Project Fear takes you to that edge so that you can see who you are. It takes you to the edge of who you are. Right? There gets a point where you're just like, I can't be doing with this anymore. And then at that point, you know who you are, right? So that's the purpose of Project Fear. So I've been talking a lot about my program, the 100. And I've been really, really excited about it. And I've been talking about it, and a lot of the women that I serve mainly women. That is my niche. My niche is to serve women. Yes, I have a few men in my communities, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. Like, fill your boots. I consider myself an inclusive person, but I had somebody write to me recently, and I'd written this post, and it was all about the priestesses and the goddess energy, and it was all about women and how I was calling forth women for the 100. And the person that wrote to me said, hey, this post excludes people like me. I'm non-binary. I had a bit of a reaction because I was thinking, okay. And I didn't like the idea that I was maybe like upsetting someone out there. That did not sit well with me. I didn't like that. But I was kind of like taken aback a little bit because I was thinking, okay. And I'm trying to think, how do I navigate this situation? And I had several discussions with my team about it. And one of the things that came through, there was several reasons why I felt a little bit triggered. So I'm going to go over that. And I know that this is a difficult conversation to have, right? And here's why. Because Project Fear is literally all over this thing, all over it. And here's why. Because a lot of people are afraid to have the difficult conversations about gender, about race. These are hot topics within our own society at the moment, and we're really sometimes struggling to have those conversations because fear is present, right? And fear doesn't make a good buddy in this conversation, because the fear is, well, what if somebody misconstrues what I say and then labels me as somebody that's against other people or against a group of people, and therefore they then invoke cancel culture. So if you're a business owner or you're a person and you are and you've been worried about cancel culture, is that something that's come up for you about when you've given your opinion on social media or you've shared something? Have you worried, or have you edited yourself and not shared what you wanted to share because you're afraid of being edited or being cancelled or somebody not agreeing with you? So therefore you avoid those conversations, you avoid the difficult subjects that we have within. So Vandra saying I'm 100% scared of cancel culture. Sometimes I do find that, right? So I know that a few of you find this. So this is why I wanted to bring this up, because this is like a juicy topic. Because I think all of us, and this is a place for project fear. So why are we feeling like that? Well, we have fear. That's why we're feeling like that. We have fear. That's why we feel that way. We are worried. We are scared that somehow we're not going to fit the narrative that society, a very narrow narrative that society is producing. And somehow we're going to fall foul of expectations of society or expectations of us as spiritual people, or so we're afraid to have these conversations. So as I kind of felt this comment and I was thinking, oh my goodness, right, okay, well, I don't ever want somebody, I remember standing in a gym kit. I don't know if any of you have this image as well. I was rubbish at sports. Put it this way, I wouldn't pick myself if I was at school picking people for, you know, if you wanted to win the game, you weren't going to pick Joanna, right? Because I was not good at sports. That was not a thing. If it was a Krypton factor thing, like using your noggin, using your brain, pick me because I will help you win. But if it was like a sporty thing, do not pick me, right? But so I wouldn't pick myself. But like, I remember standing in that gym kit, being one of the last people being picked, right? Like, it feels horrible. The exclusion of that feels absolutely yuck. So of course, like when somebody's saying, hey, you've excluded people like me in my inbox, I'm like, oh my God. So brought up all of that for me. Now I know that's my stuff, not my person who's writing to me stuff, right? But then I was thinking about it, and there was things that were coming up for me, like, would this person have written to a man who was calling forth men? Would they have written to a man and said, your post excludes me? Now, obviously, I could ask that person and say, would you have done that? But again, it felt really confrontational to do that. So I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have that conversation there. But here's the thing, that it doesn't really matter, because what matters is what you're feeling and what's coming up for you, right? Because that's the bit that you can control. You cannot control the outer world. With all the best will in the world, you cannot control the outer world, but you can control how you're feeling, and you can control how you're processing the world and what you're doing and how you're processing that world. So I started to kind of think, you know, of different things, but really what it came down to, it was like, well, actually, you know, here was this opportunity that came up. And the opportunity that came up for me was an opportunity as an agent of the universe. So I tend to see if you ever get triggered or anything like that, and if you're in my LightWeb program, or if you're in my Unity program, we talk about agents of the universe. And this was an agent of the universe because I had felt slightly triggered. I felt like, oh my God, I didn't like the idea that maybe somebody was upset with me. I didn't like the idea of feeling like I was excluding someone. But then at the same time, I didn't really like the idea of somebody telling me how to speak either. And especially when I'm talking about priestess energy and goddess energy, which by its very nature and definition does not include kind of other genders in that, you know, if we're speaking from a feminine context. So it was kind of like a difficult thing to navigate. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, but here's the thing that comes up, is that it's a conversation that brings fear to a lot of people. A lot of people don't know how to handle these conversations. They don't know how to lead themselves through these conversations, because what's leading them is fear. Does that make sense to everybody? And while fear is leading, what is actually, if you look at the energy behind it, it's like, you're either letting source lead, which is love, or you're letting fear lead, which is fear, or void lead, which is fear, right? So one is either leading the conversation, and while you're in that fearful energy, fear is leading the show. But when I really thought about it and I really broke it down, I thought, you know what? My door is always open, but my language is a feminine language because ultimately that is who I serve. My niche is to serve spiritual women. That's my niche. And if you don't identify as a spiritual woman, there's a choice on the table. The choice is, I like Joanna's content, I'm going to continue watching her, or I do not like Joanna's content, or I like her content, but I do not like the fact that she speaks to women and I don't identify as one. So there's the choice there. Does that make sense to everyone? But here's the thing, like, we try so hard sometimes in life to be politically correct. And I really think that we do the world a disservice when we try so hard to be politically correct at the detriment of who we are. Does that make sense? And this isn't about excluding anybody as much as it is about kind of qualifying who are the right people for the work that you have. And that, but when you are dealing with a person who is in an identified minority group, then this makes it a very difficult conversation to have, right? Because fear creeps in, aka project fear creeps in, and you're like, what if they decide to be really, really offended at this? Or what if, what if this is something that will end up leading to cancel culture? Or what if, but we can't continue in society being led by fear like this. We have to learn to lead with love. And it starts with self-love. So if you really tune into your own energy and put your hand on your heart and just take a deep breath. And what if we really, really tune into who are we here to serve? Who are we here to serve? And there is no right or wrong answer, except what is the right or wrong answer for you? Right? There's no right or wrong answer except the right and wrong answer for you. So it isn't about you it isn't about excluding anyone. It's about who are you here to serve? And I want you to think about, while you're in that energy of who are you here to serve, would you mind if somebody who wasn't in that category sort of came along for the ride, if they invited themselves along? Like, would that put you up or down? Let me know in the comments if that would put you up or down. Or would you be okay with it? So Theo here is saying total sense. We each have a choice. As a business owner, we cannot possibly be the person that everyone aligns with. We speak our truth and they have a choice. Exactly, right? They have a choice. So Ashley's saying here, she'd be totally down with, and Gretchen is also saying she'd be okay with it. Men or any gender can join, but it's all energy, right? I think in my case, it would be okay with it. If we look at this as well, like I was trying to kind of create other scenarios, right? Like was I being unreasonable? Was I being, because I'm willing to be wrong in my life. I'm willing to have the hard conversations. I'm willing to look at my own energy and be called on my shit, right? So I'm like looking for the shit. I'm like, is this me not being inclusive? Is this me being, excluding somebody? And I'm willing to have those conversations. I'm here for it. But here's the thing, like, as I was looking at it, I thought, well, when I write to a coach who says, hey, I coach children, would I write to that coach and be like, hey, your language is not very inclusive to adults? And I thought, no, I think I would respect that the coach is for children. And I have a couple of women in my community who I am so proud to support, and I love supporting them, but they coach exclusively other Black female entrepreneurs. That's what they do. That's their niche, right? And so would I ever think to writing to one of these amazing coaches that are in my communities and go, well, hey, how about like you change your language a little bit because I'm feeling left out as a mixed race person? I wouldn't do that, because I was like, I respect that that's their niche, right? Like I respect that that's their niche. So I had to kind of like, there was a whole thing I had to like workshop through. And I actually think my team were a little bit like, let it go, Joanna. But I knew that there was a deeper conversation under here, and I wanted to have that conversation. And the reason I wanted to have that conversation is what I realized as I was sifting through like all of the pieces and like what was coming up for me and all of the stuff and literally doing the work, right? And as I was coming through all of this, what I realized was that there was a really beautiful opportunity for me to be more rock solid and more certain in who I'm here for. So I was really grateful for that. The second thing that I realized was how many of us have shied away from conversations like this because we are so afraid of being on the wrong side of a conversation like this. Right? Like I know for me that it's been in the past, it's been something that I have been afraid of, right? And I don't, I know who I am as a person, and as a person, I don't want ever to somebody to feel discriminated against and excluded and to feel, like any type of sexism or racism or anything like that. That's something I know that I'm actively here to shift that in this world. But at the same time, I serve who I serve. And so it was like a kind of a little tricky thing to navigate. But I know a lot of us, sometimes it comes up, and I thought, you know what? I really feel like this is a transmission of light in the fact that these are the conversations that need to be had within our world as well, right? Because things don't change. One of the things that I want to share with you is this idea. So as we were kind of workshopping this, myself and Jen on my team, who is also a qualified psychologist. So we were having a really in-depth conversation about this. One of the analogies that came up and came through that conversation is an analogy that I want to share. In society, there is a table, okay? And what happens is that a lot of us sometimes stand by the sidelines on the table, waiting to be offered a seat at the table. But that's not how the table works. The table doesn't work that way. Yes, there is minority groups within our society that are massively discriminated against, but here's the thing. There is no invites to the table. You have to pick up a chair and place it at the table and sit down like you belong. And there is only one human being that can pick up the chair, place it down for you, and sit your tush down on the chair like you belong at the table of society. And that is you. And we have to do that through the ownership of our own energy. Because if we don't take ownership of our own energy and are willing to sit at the table, but we're sitting at a table, a multicultural, multi-gender table. It is the melting pot of society at this table. And so it is up to us to make that decision to come and grab a seat at the table. But as we are sitting at that table, we also have to respect that everybody else at that table is on their own journeys and are perhaps have different agendas than yours. And it's what we can bring to the table, not what we can take from the table. It's what we can bring from the table. So here's the thing. Sometimes when we are triggered because we don't feel like we are included in something, what actually is coming up for us is this deep down knowing, feeling that actually perhaps the change that we are looking for is the one that we are here to make ourselves. Does that make sense? So Elena here is saying, I've tried to have this conversation with someone about niches, and they were like, it doesn't count when we are the oppressed ones. But this is it, like I feel like this is the juiciness of this conversation, right? Because not everything is for everyone, but as we try to move towards a more inclusive world, that is also part of the messaging, right? Like everything should be for everyone. And yet, do you really, like, if you're really honest with yourself, do you want to live in a world where everything is for everyone? Or is it okay that some coaches just coach children and some, women only coach fellow African-American women? Or is it okay that some coaches only coach women or those? But at the same time, if somebody wants to follow me, I have no issue with that. But my language is going to be feminine in nature because it's what I do. But I think as we try to create this world of like total inclusivity, what happens is that it's, I love that people specialize in their skills, right? I love that too. But you have to admit, guys, this is a juicy conversation, is it not? In that it's something that I think all of us will have to face at some point. And as we try to strive to create a more inclusive world, but at the same time, we also have to respect that there is certain boundaries and borders to ourselves as well. So I'm just saying juicy, juicy. So let's have a wee check in here. So yes, specialization is natural. Yes, I think so as well. And I think if we speak from love and we're mindful of others, the right people will align with our message, is what Theo here is saying. So my language is feminine because I'm speaking from my experience. Exactly. This is what Theo here is saying. So this is it, right? My lens will always be a feminine lens. I have been very, very privileged, and I understand that it is privilege, and I feel very lucky. I have been born into a body that I identify with. I have been born into a woman's body, and I identify as a woman. I could not imagine being any other gender than the one that was assigned to me at birth. So in that way, yes, that is a privilege when there is people who do not have the same experience as me. And I'm willing to admit that, and I'm willing to say, wow, okay, that's me. But at the same time, also, that is also my personal experience and my lens through this. And I feel like if we shy away if we're looking to step up in our leadership, and we're looking to step up in our leadership of leading other people and helping other people, we can't step up in our leadership when fear is running the show, right? If we're shying away from having these conversations, if we're shying away from, the difficult subject matters, and we're like, oh, I'm giving that one a wide berth, then how are we here to really improve? Because it's about having a conversation. But I think also as well, like there is a way to have this conversation. And I think the way to have this conversation is first and foremost to be willing to be wrong, right? And if we're not willing to be wrong, we need to really check ourselves. Is the ego running the show, or are we running the show, right? So that's the first step. So step number one is being willing to be wrong. The second step is making sure that you're able to have this conversation in a context where you're not going to get crucified for your opinion. Because it's just that. it's an opinion. And I think that's a really important thing as well. But nobody can really make us feel safe. It is only us that allows ourselves to feel safe. Do you feel safe enough to have these conversations? And the reason why a lot of people do not feel safe enough to have these conversations is because they don't know who they are. And when you don't know who you are, stepping into what society sees as hot topics, explosive topics, topics that potentially can be very volatile and upsetting for people, then when we don't know who we are fully, it's extremely difficult to have these conversations. They're stressful to have instead of juicy and interesting. It is also as well the context that we sometimes naturally assume that when somebody doesn't agree with us, they are against us. And this is part of, I feel like, the politically correct culture of the last few years of what's happened in our society, of everyone trying to be, right in a way, instead of being willing to have difficult conversations. And that's because there is such a black and white of it's either right or wrong. There's no discussion anymore. And I think part of our job as spiritual leaders and as leaders and stepping up into our leadership and having students and clients and people who follow our work, it is our sacred duty to open up discussion in our forums and in our spaces that we create for our clients, to create safe places to have discussions. And that's not that we're perpetuating hate. That's not that we're perpetuating inequality or that we're perpetuating any of those energies. We're able to have a discussion like adult humans, as opposed to skirting around deep issues that really, really affect our society and really affect groups of people within our society, and then not having those. Because what happens is it drives, like the subject matter doesn't go away, it just goes underground instead. Just like Project Fear. Once you become woke enough on the surface and you see fear for what it is, that thing goes underground and it starts showing up in sneaky places where you don't even realize that it's fear that's running the show, avoiding conversations like these. Doing something against yourself. It could have been very easy for me when I got that message to think, okay, well, I need to change my language straight away. But then I kind of sat there and I thought about it and I was like, you know what? I was like, is this such a bad thing that I'm calling forth women? When there is a person in my inbox saying I don't identify as one? And when I started to play the scenario with things like, if I was a children's coach and an adult wrote to me and said, hey, I don't identify as a child because I'm grown up and I'm an adult, I think your language should be more inclusive, right? And I started to realize that maybe it's not my language that needs to change. But in my immediate thought was, ooh, maybe I need to do this. Does that make sense to everyone? And what I really wanted to have this conversation or bring this forward through as a transmission of light is I don't want you to be afraid of this, because that's just another place where fear hangs out in your life. Be willing to have the conversations that are difficult. Be willing to have a discussion about things and be willing to be wrong. Be willing for someone else to have a different opinion and be willing for their opinion to maybe even change your mind. It is okay. But it's a lot easier to have these conversations when we know who the fuck we are. Because when we're solid in ourselves, when we know who we are, we know what we're about. We're not wibbling and wobbling. The people pleaser isn't running the show. We're not running around afraid of the consequences of our words, that we are solid, that we're coming from a good and loving place within ourselves. Then it makes it a lot easier to have these conversations. And that in the way means that the work in our world or in our society is as important to do the work on ourselves as it is to do the work out there. And to really move back into what we call in my world a state of unity with yourself, of really learning to know yourself. For years, I had a very, what I call a ferocious brand of people pleaser. And if that is something that you resonate with as well, and you know that you've had people pleasing tendencies in the past, or you're still maybe battling with that today, the people pleaser in the shadow web archetypes that we teach is what we call the soul seller, because the people pleaser is literally willing to sell your soul to please another human. Amazing. Holly here is saying, I have a non-binary adult child who is a psychologist and only works with the LGBTQ community. Amazing. Amazing. And never in a million years would I think of writing to them and saying, hey, which, you know, as a non-LGBTQ, but an ally, would you like to include me, right? Because here's the thing, they have a niche and I respect that. And here's the thing. And I think as we create a more inclusive world, we have to leave room for niches, as long as those niches are not excluding people. Because if that person was like, I'm still going to follow you, like, even though you use feminine language, I'm cool with that. I have no issue whatsoever. Because I really do feel like we should live in a world where we're free to love who we want to love, and we're free to be the gender that we feel that we are. Those are important, fundamental human rights, I believe. But there is still niches within that world. And there has to be room for both. Because otherwise what we end up with is a room full of people pleasers where no one's happy, where no one's feeling good about themselves, no one's feeling good about anything. We're just trying to busy making sure everybody likes us. And the thing is, I made peace a long time ago that not everybody was going to like me. And it's, as a business owner, I can tell you, it is one of the most liberating moments of your life when you realized that you don't have to be liked by everybody. And actually, it's much better if you start by liking yourself. And that means doing things that feel in alignment to you. So, Irene here is saying this is very valuable. Thank you, Joanna, for bringing this up and taking the risk. Yes, and isn't it funny that a conversation like this feels like a risk? Like somebody just pulled the pin, chucked the grenade in, and it's like, let's hope that doesn't detonate, right? But if we're going to grow as a society, if we're going to grow as a community of spiritual entrepreneurs, we got to stop treating these conversations like the grenade and start embracing that they are important for our welfare, they're important for the welfare of society, and they're important to have difficult conversations. We can't be letting fear rule the roost there either, and then, shying away from the difficulty. that they sometimes pose these types of conversations. And I think this is really, really important, that it's okay for you. But it's a lot easier for you to have these conversations if you know who you are. That's the key. The key is learning who you are and learning about your energy and your boundaries and your borders first. Because when we have these conversations from a place of, we've got maybe like my past version of me who had a very ferocious brand of people pleaser. I tried very hard to be liked by everybody, and it was exhausting. You know, and when you're trying to have these conversations from that, you are not only are you harming the space of the conversation, but you're harming yourself as well, and possibly potentially the other person. It is so important for you to be true to yourself and to really be true to who you are. And I truly believe that when we are in our truest essence, when we are in our truest selves, because here, spoiler alert, you're all source. So in your truest essence and in your truest self, we can trust ourselves, because in our truest essence and in our truest self, we are love. We are love. And I think it is a profound act of self-love to be able to say about oneself that I am not for everybody. That's okay. That doesn't mean that you're purposely excluding them or that you're purposely looking to harm them. That is being honest. One of my favorite sayings is that even chocolate can't please all of the people, right? I happen to love chocolate, but I also happen to know some very strange people who don't like it at all, right? But here's the thing. It's like, you can't please all of the people. It is designed that way. I believe society, I believe the world, I believe the energy of which what we are enjoying in the contrast, because that's, after all, why we are here on planet Earth right now, experiencing a human life, is that contrast. So it is actually designed that we're not meant to like all of the people all of the time. It is also designed that we are not meant to feel like everything is for us. There's going to be things. I give you another strange example that's literally just popped through my channel. I love to swim. I know people who hate water. They hate being in the water. They love a shower, they love a bath, but get them in a swimming pool, get them in the water, they're like, oh, I don't like that. Right? Tara here is saying, I don't like ice cream. So all stores should stop selling it. Don't take my ice cream. Right? Here's the thing. This is it. This is it. So it's like, we're, you know, I think one of the things that we need to learn is to celebrate diversity. And in order for diversity to exist, we can't be everything to everyone. We have to be ourselves. And I really think that if we can trust ourselves to be our truest essence, we will be a reflection of love. Because that is what source is. Ashley saying Jesus Christ couldn't please everyone. True that, true that. And Theo saying we must have ice cream. Yes. And it's like, a world without ice cream would be a very boring place. A world without chocolate would be a very boring place. Like, there's lots, but everything, anything that we, you know, that people have different opinions on, like, it belongs here. You belong here because you're here. You belong in this world, you know? But here's another, you know, let's use ice cream again as a, like, ice cream is possibly not the best choice for a main course, right? But it does make a good dessert. And there's it, right? Like, there is but we can, it all gets to come on the table. It all gets to sit at the table. I love chili, but not everyone does, exactly, right? And it's allowing that diversity to be something, to be diverse, and being willing to have these conversations where people potentially don't always agree with us. I think it's really important, but project fear is what really makes these conversations so difficult to have, because it's your own stuff, it's your own fear interfering with the process, interfering with the ability to have the conversation. When we know who we are, when we are willing to face the negative patterns that we have, like the pattern of the people pleaser, and we're willing to face our, what we call the shadow web patterns. When you're willing to face the shadow web patterns of, the first one is poor little me. That's the first shadow web pattern. That pattern is like the story that we tell. We all have a poor little me story. The story that we tell that starts like this, poor little me. And we tell how somehow we are hard done by within the world, right? So my favorite flavor of poor little me was, poor little me, I have to do it all, it's all on me. That was my favorite flavor. The next one is the energy vampire. So obviously other people use the term energy vampire, but in this context, what the energy vampire is, where any story that we have that starts with my life sucks. So my life sucks, and then you fill in your blank of why it sucks. These are what's taking us deep into our shadow. The next shadow web archetype is the imposter. The imposter is where we don't feel like we have a right. We don't feel like we're maybe good enough, or we don't feel like, oh, look at that table, I'm never going to get a seat there. I'm like, but if I did sit down there, oh my God, they would, like, any minute now, they're going to find me out. They're going to find me out. They're going to find out I don't belong at the table. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It's that feeling inside of where we feel like a total imposter. We feel like a fraud. The final shadow web archetype is the soul seller. The soul seller is where our people pleaser lives. The soul seller, in order to kind of get out alive, is willing to sell their soul, is willing to do something that is against their innate nature. It's willing it's that piece of us where we're willing to keep the peace at all costs. We're willing to keep the peace at all costs. Even if that costs us, we're willing to keep the peace. That is the soul seller energy. Those are the 4 shadow web archetypes that Skylar teaches on. And when we are willing to look at those archetypes within ourselves, when we're willing to work through those archetypes, and we're willing to look at that and say, okay, well, let me look at where I feel hard done by, let me look at where I feel the poor little me, let me look at where I feel like, fuck my life sucks, in that places. Let me look at that energy. Let me look at the energy where I feel I do not belong. Let me look at the energy where I feel a fraud or an imposter. Let me look at the energy where I'm willing to bend over backwards, usually for people who are not willing to bend over backwards for myself. But I do that bending over backwards. That's okay. That's not a problem. It's only a problem when you bend over backwards and you're code for resentment. That means you're not in alignment with your truth. You're not in alignment with who you are. And all of those things happen as a result of you being out of alignment with yourself. And so when we go to have society's harder conversations, society's more difficult conversations, it is extremely hard if we're trying to have those conversations with our own wounds gaping, with our own wounding open, because we don't know who we are. We don't know our own boundaries and our own borders. And it's like, there's this saying that if you don't stand for anything, you fall for anything. And I love that in a way, because the thing is that is, who are you? Who are you? That's a fundamental question. Who are you? And this is something that, we teach on in my world. We teach on this in 2 places. The place that we really teach on this is inside my Unity program. That's what we teach. on this of really learning to know who you are, really learning to reconnect with yourself from the perspective and the point of view that you are your own source connection. If you are your own source connection. If you're disconnected with yourself, trust me when I tell you that there's a disconnection with you and source as well, because you are your own source connection. So a disconnection with yourself. If you frequently feel bad about yourself, you don't feel good about yourself always, then we are disconnecting with ourselves somewhere. And there is no other human being on this planet that can help you reconnect. You have to walk that walk yourself. Somebody can guide you on how to reconnect. And that's what we do inside Unity. But it's only you that can walk that walk and reconnect your own energy, reconnect your own frequency. And so this is why it's important, but it's also important to understand the bigger ramifications, because when we're willing to do the inner work on ourselves, we're more qualified to have the conversations that once we were too afraid to have, because we can trust ourselves. And this spills into even making money, right? Making money. A lot of people are actually afraid of success. Let us know in the comments if you've ever been afraid of success, right? Have you ever been like, you can't handle it? Have you worried, like, if I get loads and loads of success, I'm going to be so busy and I can't handle it? Or if I get loads and loads and loads of money, what if I don't handle it? These are all things that we have with success, right? This comes from a space and a place within us where we don't know ourselves fully. Because if you knew yourself and you're like certain in yourself and you feel solid in yourself, you say, well, I say how and I say when and I say who. But if we'd have years of conditioning and years of people pleasing, we're like, if this change happens in my life and I become really busy and I made lots of money, I don't know if I can trust myself to say no enough, right? That comes from not knowing ourselves. That's why the idea of making lots of money or the idea of becoming or creating a busier business can seem daunting and frightening, because the person running it, which is you, doesn't fully trust themselves. So the invite here for all of us is to step into a deeper partnership and relationship with ourselves. So when that agent appeared in my inbox, I was so grateful for the opportunity that that person gave me to really, really examine myself and really look deeper at my own conversation that I was having with myself, to look at what was coming up and to give myself the opportunity of this was an opportunity to become more certain in me. That has nothing to do with the outer world. That has just everything to do with you and you. When we do that, when we're willing to do that. So Alina here says, I had a thought of the fear of failure, but I suddenly realized that it was a fear of success. Today, I can say, bring it on. I am ready for success. I love that. That's amazing. I told my hubby that I have a fear once came up, that we have the money, that you won't need me and leave me. Yeah, we have lots of fears, right? But we can't let fear dictate how we're going to live our lives. If we let fear dictate how we're going to live our lives, we can't like be surprised when the shit shows up, or the life that we didn't want shows up, right? The life that we want is a life that we would love. Therefore, it lives at the frequency of love. That means as human beings, as walking transmission towers of energy, we need to learn to vibrate at the frequency of love. And that starts with self-love, because how the hell are we going to know what love looks like for any other human being or person or thing if we don't even know what it looks like for ourselves? And that's what Unity is all about. Stepping in to that bigger, brighter, bolder version of yourself, learning about who you are, learning where your own boundaries are, learning what you're up for, open and available for, and what you're not open and available for. That's what unity is all about. This month is Unity Month here in my world. So if you are interested in joining us on that journey, then you can reach out to the team. But I feel like today's conversation is complete. I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation. I hope that it's made you think. And I hope that in the future that you won't shy away from having your own difficult conversations and conversations that will hopefully lead to deeper understandings for all people. So thank you so much. You are welcome. Carol, you are welcome. Tracy, you're welcome. So yes, I am looking forward to seeing you guys tackle some of these amazing conversations that are to be had. And so I'm sending you lots of love and light from myself and Skylar and everybody here at Team Hunter. Speak to you soon. Take care.